Good
Hi,
evening,
everyone.
everyone.
Kathleen, this is Melissa here. Let me get started, and I'll turn it over to you in just a second.
Okay,
So hi, everyone. Melissa Raspberry here. Kathleen and I were both so excited. We're talking at the same time. We're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar, but I did want to share a few technical things with you. If you haven't done so already, we do encourage you to use the conference line number on the screen. I'll also post it in the chat window so that you can call in. We have a great set of panelists, a panel of guests this evening, I should say. But we want to hear from you all as part of the audience and really make this participatory. And to do that, much easier if you call in and chime into the conversation orally. You're more than welcome to do it in the chat window as well, but we really want to literally hear your voice and hear from you if you're able. We do ask, though, if you call in to please mute your line. You're able to do that both from your phone itself, but if you're on a landline, it may be easiest if you go to your toolbar here in the Adobe Connect environment, and there's a little phone icon in the drop-down menu, and beside that, it'll allow you to mute. So again, if you're not speaking, we ask you to stay on mute. We are recording this for others who could not join tonight, so just wanted to give you that heads up as well. But I think that's everything. So Kathleen, my apologies for interrupting. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
My apologies, Melissa. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. As Melissa said, we're delighted to have you with us to talk about computer science in the pre-K-12 curriculum. Melissa and I are with the CS10K Community hosting this webinar in conjunction with the Connected Educator Month this year. We're delighted with this panel of guests we have to start the conversation today. We have Dr. David Evans. He's Executive Director of the National Science Teachers Association. He leads NSTA's efforts to implement the next generation science standards in classrooms nationwide, including key computer science principles found in the NGSS, such as developing and using computational models, and using data analysis, visualization, and computation to solve problems. We have Ms. Cindy Hasselbring. She serves as Special Assistant to the State Superintendent at the Maryland State Department of Education, where she leads STEM initiatives. She led the development and implementation of a statewide STEM education strategic plan, and she's currently leading efforts to scale up computer science pre-K-12 across the state. Prior to working with MSDE, Cindy completed 2 years as an Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellow at the National Science Foundation. She is a 16-year veteran mathematics teacher at Milan High School in Michigan, and she received the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching. She's also a golfer and a pilot. Tom Keller has worked at various levels in science education for longer than he cares to or can remember, he says, from being a high school teacher to working at the Board of Science Education of the National Academy of Sciences, where he co-directed the framework for K-12 Science Education Report. He's now principal investigator on a project to bring the Explore in Computer Science curriculum to Maine by including Maine workplace-based lessons that demonstrate computer science in local industries. In addition, he is the executive director of the Maine STEM Council, a blue ribbon commission creating strategies for improving STEM education and workforce in Maine. Matt Larsen is president-elect of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. For over 20 years, he served as the K-12 curriculum specialist for mathematics for the Lincoln Public Schools in Nebraska. He began his career as a high school mathematics and computer science teacher. And Irene Lee is the chair of the Computer Science Teachers Association Computational Thinking Task Force and served as a member of the CSTA K-12 Computer Science Standards writing team. She's also director of the Learning Lab at Santa Fe Institute. She's principal investigator of a CS10K project, New Mexico Computer Science for All, and PI of Teachers with Guts and Young Women Growing Up Thinking Computationally, and she is program director of Project Guts, Growing Up Thinking Scientifically. Irene received a BA in pure mathematics from the University of Chicago and an EDM from Harvard Graduate School of Education. Previously, she designed and developed educational and video games for Electronic Arts and Theatrics Interactive and worked in informal education as a science specialist. She's the past president of the Supercomputing Challenge and the Swarm Development Group. So I want to, again, thank you all. It's a very distinguished panel and really rich in math and science education and computer science. So we'll start with questions, but I'd like you all to feel free to join in the conversation. It's not like raise your hand and I'll call on you. Just please feel free to join in with your opinion. So our first question is, should computer science be a separate course or integrated into science and math courses, or even social studies, arts, and humanities? Tom, maybe you could start off. I just said I wasn't going to ask each person, but you were the one who started this whole conversation with us a few months back, and because you're so interested in it, could you start with your perspective on this?
Sure. Thanks, Kathleen. So Maine, like many other states, has been playing a bit of catch-up on this computer science area, and we are trying to figure out, does it make sense to go down a route of, like Bugs in the System, the report that the CSTA and ACM came out with, of a separate certification for teachers, or doesn't it make more sense for kids to be learning about this, particularly in their math and science classes? So I would suggest that the answer to question one is that integrating it into particularly science and math, but other classes as well, makes more sense, especially when we get to defining what it is.
This is David. I sort of didn't like this question because I didn't like the either-or aspect of it. It seems to me I'd like to say yes to both halves. That is, I think there's room for a separate computer science course or courses, but I think that for most students, maybe, or certainly for many, many students, having computer science integrated in with science and math courses, or possibly others, is not only practical but probably really desirable. But to put them one against the other, I think is not really helpful.
This is Matt Larsen. I really agree with David. I don't view this as an either-or question. I think clearly there is a need for focused computer science courses at the high school level in particular, but there are also conditions under which infusion in a math class makes a lot of sense. But what I think is important is, if computer science is going to be infused into a mathematics course, it should be in support of the mathematics being taught rather than as a distinct topic. The way I look at this is that in a mathematics course, the mathematics should be in the first position. Otherwise, the course should be called a computer science course, where computer science is in the first position and math supports the computer science learning. The two content areas, they each have their own unique learning objectives and demands, and clearly each can support the other, but when integrating them, I think you have to be aware of the primary learning goals of the course and make sure those are enhanced and one doesn't replace the other by integration.
Mm-hmm. This is Irene. I too would argue for both. I see value in offering computer science as a separate course where you could provide fundamentals and time to practice building skills. And then through integration, students would be able to use powerful tools, and not just as end users, but they could also be creators of computer models that would be used to run simulation experiments in science. They could write some routines to do data analysis and pattern identification in math. And through integration, they could also write programs that would help generate unique and beautiful artifacts in arts classes and the like.
And
and this is Cindy. I'd like to, share that I agree with David and Matt and the panelists, but Matt in particularly because I think if you can infuse it well, it shouldn't be done at all. It has to have a purpose, and it has to really support the goals of the learning goals that are desired. And I know we have a couple schools in Maryland that are a district actually that has integrated coding into their 7th and 8th grade math and science courses, so that as students are learning about the Pythagorean theorem, they're using coding as a strategy to solve it. So I think that's a really strategic way of using it, and also teaching a really valuable concept. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all, and it shouldn't be infused if it can't be done well, but it really does need to be linked to what the learning goals are and making sure they're in support of that.
So very, very interesting, everyone. It was a sort of a trick question, but you answered it. I mean, it was really interesting to hear your answers on it. I sort of see it like an English class. You wouldn't just say, well, should we have a separate English class, or should we have writing throughout all their classes? I mean, it's so. Thanks for your response.
This is Tom. I would like not to leave this just yet, because the reality in schools is that there is so much on their plate right now that if we add something, it would have to be an elective, which, or most likely it would be an elective, and thus not every kid would access it, and B, we'd have to figure out what it really is. So that's why I'm much more inclined to promote the integrated piece, but I'd love to hear what other folks, particularly what the participants have to say. I see there's a little bit of chat in the window, but there is just it's hard to add something into the K-12 curriculum.
I can add that in Maryland in 2013 we had a Senate Bill 740 pass that required all Maryland students to take a math course for each year they're in high school. So previously they were required to take 3 math courses. So to help with course offerings in addition to workforce needs, AP Computer Science did count as a math credit for the first time ever. So it didn't really replace a math since there were only 3 required previously, but now the 4th year AP Computer Science can count as a math credit, and that also maybe helps a little bit with the teacher scheduling and so on, because schools didn't necessarily hire more math teachers, though they probably needed to. So, and then now in 2015, Maryland now allows AP Computer Science to count as a technology education credit, which for me personally makes a lot more sense, because as we know, math is definitely a needed area for college readiness. So we do have a couple options to help students take AP Computer Science or Computer Science principles in high school.
I think Cindy brings up an interesting example. This is Matt Larsen, and I think we would argue that we would never want to replace a mathematics course with a computer science course if that replacement took students off their path for being mathematically ready for college and careers. In other words, as you've described it, what I heard was it could count for that 4th year of high school mathematics. So that would imply that students have completed either Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, which under many definitions is minimal college career readiness, or Integrated Math 1, 2, and 3 if schools are organized that way. At that point, then for a 4th year, it might count if it's appropriate, but we would still argue that if a computer science course fulfills a mathematics graduation requirement, that it should still have explicit mathematical learning goals. Otherwise, it's not really a mathematics course, and clearly there are ways to do that. But I think, again, if you're going to call it a math course, it ought to have explicit math learning goals.
So Cindy, if Maryland thought that students needed a fourth math course, wouldn't using computer science for that credential then kind of go against what Matt's talking about?
Well, yeah, and that's one reason why I'm very glad that the technology education credit now can count AP Computer Science as that credit, because it does help us with the math. As far as you can't double dip. You can't count that AP Computer Science course as a tech ed credit and a math credit. It doesn't work that way.
And you need a tech ed credit.
Right, right.
Okay.
So students are required to do a tech ed credit. Previously, they could count an engineering class only as a tech ed credit or a Foundations of Technology class. So now the students can choose either engineering or computer science, and if they count the computer science for their tech ed credit, they need the 4 years of math.
Mm-hmm. So, Tom, did you want to explore this any more?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, though, Kathleen.
Okay. It's really interesting. So, if we are infusing the math and the computer science into the math and science courses, how would the teachers react to that idea, and what kind of support would they need to incorporate the computer science concepts?
David, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Well, you know, in the simple sense, would teachers support it? I think probably yes. You know, we're still very early on in the implementation of NGSS, but computational thinking, building models, and data analysis are all concepts which lend themselves very, very well to being, for which, you know, computers are very helpful, for which computer science-like thinking and approaches, algorithmic thinking, is very appropriate. And so it's easy to imagine that as we begin to develop lessons, as we begin to develop curricula in support of NGSS, that it's a very natural time to begin to think about how to include those computer science concepts that specifically address those science and engineering practices. So I think, you know, in the absence of any actual data, because we are, you know, really at the beginning of developing NGSS-like material, the answer is likely to be yes. Having said that, I think that, if you will, traditionally trained science teachers are going to have some, you know, it adds another dimension to the already heavy load of professional development, professional learning that teachers need to experience as they move into the world of NGSS. So I think it's yes and a little bit of yes but, because it's more. On the other hand, we're going to be asking a lot more of the students. So I think it kind of fits together in a natural way, but we'll have to pay a lot of attention to the kind of support teachers are going to need to do it.
I think from a math perspective, the answer is it depends. The reality is an awful lot of math teachers are also computer science teachers, as was mentioned in the introduction. When I first started teaching high school mathematics, I also had a computer science programming assignment. So, and that traditionally has continued in many schools across the country. So I don't think the question isn't really would math teachers buy into the idea. It'll again come back to whether integrating the computer science content into the mathematics course would support and enhance the math goals of the class. As everybody has mentioned, teachers have an awful lot packed into their courses, and that's true whether it's English, science, or mathematics. Any of the accountability subjects have a lot of learning objectives and goals and targets that have to be met. So I think as long as the computer science content was in support of those mathematics learning goals, it's highly likely that a large percentage of math teachers would buy into the idea. But if that weren't the case, then I think it would become problematic because math teachers are going to say, but I've got all this math content I have to teach. They'd have to see how computer science supported that learning outcome.
Irene, do you think the modeling involved in computer science could help students with math, seeing things more easily than just solving equations?
Yes, I think for some visualization through models is useful. Just to answer the previous question, though, I've seen a lot of strong buy-in and excitement for the integration of computer science and science with the experience of offering teacher professional development in project.code.org workshops. And also, for the Bootstrap program that integrates CS and algebra, they've had really strong buy-in from teachers. I think one of the key questions is whether, the students are achieving the learning objectives in science and math better through integration of computer science. And in some cases, I think there's a little bit of preliminary research, at least in the algebra learning through the Bootstrap curriculum, that is the case.
Just to add something.
This is Tom.
Sorry.
I'd just like to chime in on this second question here, the support they need to successfully incorporate. One piece, with both Common Core Math and NGSS being relatively new and in the throes of creating new curriculum to go along with them, clearly there's some good stuff. Irene's GUTS program and Bootstrap are nice, complete examples, but it would be very helpful if there were some units or some really good exemplary instructional examples that show how one goes about, Matt's thesis that it needs to be in support of the content area. So what are the key computer science concepts that are necessary to help learn the mathematics or the science or the social studies you're going for? And right now, the support that teachers could use would be some really good examples.
I was going to say, just in response to your question, too, would math teachers buy into the idea? I think so, too. I do think that getting math teachers to understand what computational thinking even is, because you hear that term, but it's not really defined very well unless you're maybe a computer science teacher, so sharing that would be helpful. And I kind of saw the benefits of infusion on accident. When I was teaching a trigonometry class a few years ago, I was teaching the spherical law of cosines where students can calculate the distance between 92 cities around the world, and I had a student that rather than using the complex formula that it is, decided to write a program on his graphing calculator so that it would do it all for him, which is pretty complex because when you have different hemispheres, you have to take that into account. And so for me, it just showed the power of programming at that level on a graphing calculator because it was much more challenging, much more engaging. He was very proud of it and showed his classmates. But that for me was really it really opened my eyes to thinking, that could be used as a strategy for students solving problems. With content, like Matt was saying, it's in support of the content. It's not in conflict.
Did the other students seem to get enthused about that, or did this seem like just one special case that could do it and they could not?
They were excited about it too. I don't know if he shared it with them. I don't think he did. So maybe they weren't super excited, but they were pretty impressed because it is a pretty complex formula, and for him to develop that and thinking about all the little different pieces that he had to do in that, it was pretty powerful to me as a teacher, thinking, wow, that's another case where teachers are kind of learning alongside students, and I know that really has stuck with me, even though it was a few years ago now.
Yeah. Is there anybody from the audience who'd like to give us their thoughts on these questions, on these issues? Are there math or science teachers there, or? Okay, well, we can, I see people typing. I think we'll move on to the next question, but then come back to, so Sue says, I frequently have students ask if they can use programs they have written instead of doing the calculations by hand. The issue has been that students share the programs. But you really get an understanding of it once you've programmed it. I'm going to go to the next question. Is credentialing critical or even worthwhile for computer science teachers? Does it take up too much time, too much resources? Why or why not, if you, for your opinion? And Tom, did you? I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah. Let me at least kick this off. Because as it stands right now, there is no computer science credential in Maine. We have a teacher endorsement that is for I'd have to look it up, but it's something like, instructional technology, but that isn't computer science. Excuse me, it's called computer technology. And right now there's no computer science methods course even taught in the state. Clearly you can go online and find something, but there is no credential right now for a computer science teacher. And if you look at the beginnings of the CSTA standards, it's quite nice in that they distinguish between computer science and instructional technology and what those things are. But is it worthwhile for our state to create this credential when we really aren't sure where we're hoping to end up?
This is David. Tom, I think that the beginning of the question, the way, I see, we've changed the question a little from the written version I had. Is it critical? I think it's critical if we're going to have standalone computer science classes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have these sort of two tracks that we're talking about now. One is the sort of integration with math and science and possibly other subjects. And the one we're talking about, and in contrast to the standalone classes. I think if we're going to have standalone classes and allow them to satisfy graduation requirements in some way or another, it seems to me that having what we might call demonstrably qualified teachers to teach those classes is probably going to be an important thing. So is it worthwhile? How much does it cost? I mean, those are sort of practical sides of the questions, but if we're going to, as in evidently is the case in Maryland, if we're going to sort of elevate computer science as a subject, a separate standalone subject that carries graduation credit in some way or another, seems to me we want to have a process for licensure or certifying those teachers.
I'd agree. If we do have a required high school course, it would be important to develop a CS teaching credential. But at the same time, I feel that we have to be careful. We need to be able to grandfather in current teachers of CS while providing, continued ample support for PD and professional learning community support. So there are two excellent CSTA publications on teacher certification. One's called Ensuring Exemplary Teaching in an Essential Discipline, and the other one is the one Tom mentioned, Bugs in the System. I know there are many states that are working on CS teacher certification, including Arkansas and Wisconsin. Principals are requesting a CS teaching credential of instructors. Some other states, Texas in particular, has a pilot praxis exam, and many others are considering using the CS praxis.
And
so
yes, we are too. Maryland is too. So.
Okay. The CSTA Teaching Certificate Certification Committee is, working on this issue and is considering developing some sort of standards-based credential. But that's a bit down the road still, though.
So we're getting a lot of chat in the chat panel here. In elementary grades, partnering between the tech integrating and K-5 teachers to enrich content teaching using Scratch. Julie, would you like to talk a little bit about that? So, okay. Melissa, would you, I'm having trouble following the conversation and following the chat. I just have trouble. Would you, you're involved with, I see you're responding to people. Would you be able to summarize some of the conversations going on in the chat room?
Sure, I can try, but I really would love if someone is able to, for them to chime in directly, because we definitely want to hear voices. And Julie, I'm not, oh, I see now you were just listening and chatting, but if anyone else wants to weigh in, then please let us know, because we certainly want to hear you. Julie was sharing about that, these tech kind of specialist roles or integrator roles of individuals who work with K-5 teachers to do some Scratch coding work and working on some programming, and that being, again, kind of similar to like a specials or enrichment teacher, similar like how you might have PE or art or music and that sort of thing. And providing, if Julie provided a few other ideas of ways to integrate as well, but generally kind of the idea of thinking about even beyond high school at the K-8 level on ways that regular classroom teachers can incorporate various aspects of computer science into their content or work, so that there is more infusion and integration of those skills.
So thanks, Melissa. In terms of the credentialing, it seems like it's a work in progress as the schools, as the states start requiring computer science for graduation, then there'll have to be credentials developed.
Yeah, Kathleen, this is Tom on that question still.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it might be, what makes sense is kind of a mini credential or some kind of stackable credential rather than a full-blown endorsement, which is usually, you know, a methods course and some practicum and some other courses, and it adds up to a lot of hours, and maybe we should look at a smaller, more practical level of credential than a full-blown endorsement. And
did you call it a stackable?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
I mean, my state has said, you know, in terms of graduation requirement, there's no way they're going to add anything. We are a rabid local control state, though, and they say, however, if locals want to add that, that's perfectly fine with them. But there will be no state addition of a computer science requirement for graduation. Still, I totally agree that these folks who are teaching computer science, whatever that might be, have had some kind of training in the pedagogy and the content of what that is.
Did anybody else want to add anything to this idea?
I actually like the idea of stackable too, because, you know, computer science teacher certification by itself might be a hard sell when computer science majors can make a lot more money in industry. So it does make sense to make it stackable so that you get maybe a bigger number of teachers interested in teaching it.
It might also be, you might also want to view it just as even as a transitional phase. You know, if ultimately you'd like to have computer science credentials analogous to those in other subjects right now, maybe some sort of stackable endorsement or pathway for taking folks who already have experience would be part of this sort of a longer range plan for how you're going to get there. Just to sort of declare it by fiat and tell schools that they have to start providing the training for that seems difficult at best. So maybe this idea of having something that stacks on or adds on or complements, it would be a way of at least one way of thinking of it would be sort of as a transitional step.
It seems the participants, the audience agrees with that. A smaller credential, stackable, and a good question, a good point is that, I forget which one of you raised it about if you have a CS degree, there's a lot of competition in the marketplace. So that Sue says she worries that school districts would not be able to afford teachers who have graduated with a degree in CS. So it's an interesting problem that will evolve. Standards seem to be like that. They're needed, but you can't do them too soon, or else you're stuck in concrete in something that's outdated before it's actually formed. So,
Irene, this is Tom. I have a question for you. With your GUTS training, do you give your participants graduate credit or some kind of contact hour certification?
With our MOOC, we give some just a certificate of completion. With our Project GUTS Code.org training, some states, through partnerships with local universities, are offering graduate credit hours. Our New Mexico Computer Science for All course is also offering graduate credit at for high school teachers.
So moving on to another question, should the focus of the computing education be moved from high school to the earliest grades? This was a question Tom brought up months ago, that the focus now seems to be mostly on high school courses, but should it be moved to earlier grades? And if so, what would that look like?
Mm-hmm. I think, this is Irene, I think it can be moved to earlier grades. We've seen students, in K-5 gain a basic understanding of computers and computer instructions. Then in middle school, if they can advance to learn more about instructions and conditional statements and branching and iteration, and if they're able to do creative projects, some of those projects will involve problem solving and perhaps work in math and science as well, as early as middle school.
I think you're right.
Oh, okay.
I think you're right. I think that we're seeing a lot of elementary engineering projects, Project Lead the Way kinds of projects, lots of work that's sort of a little bit more on the engineering side, let's say, but often done in conjunction with science that gives much younger kids opportunities to, get experience with coding, begin to understand a flow of instructions, even begin to understand looping and branching. And so it seems to me that that there's a whole lot of that going on out there right now, and there are a lot of very interesting tools that I think are quite appropriate for very young students as well. And it seems to me that, again, that encouraging that way of thinking really will build and will fit in a very natural way in this more integrated kind of approach that we're talking about.
I agree with David. I think there definitely seems to have been some success as early as elementary school with some computer science concepts. So I think now an equally interesting question is, as these efforts continue to do some coding in elementary school, there ought to be a parallel effort to learn about what really works, develop some knowledge about how to do this most effectively, as has been done in other disciplines. Don't want to waste an opportunity here to grow the knowledge base about how to do this in a developmentally appropriate way at the early grades.
So this is Cindy.
Great point. I think that actually beginning to do some quantitative work on what works and what doesn't is a really important next step. We've got a huge amount of sort of anecdotal information right now, and being able to be a little bit more systematic and a little more careful about analyzing that might be a really important next step.
Cindy, did you have something?
Yeah, this question is near and dear to my heart, actually, because, just thinking about if we only focus on high school, students have already kind of decided what they're going to take by 8th grade, and it's too late. And, computer science, just the term doesn't always appeal to all kids, girls and underrepresented groups specifically. In Maryland in 2015, 56% of our AP test takers were girls, but in AP computer science, only 22% were girls. So that's a pretty clear message that girls aren't really interested in computer science. Maybe their perception is it's only programming or whatever, but we really feel like we need to reach them earlier than high school. So for that reason, we're working to build a pre-K to 12 computational thinking framework in Maryland to make connections that are logical between standards that our teachers are teaching and then computational thinking skills. So we're really excited about that. We really feel like we can make more of a difference in getting more students engaged. And we're really looking at one of our districts who has been doing a pre-K to 12 integrated approach this is their second year. So they're very early stages. There's not a lot of data to share that it's being successful other than their anecdotal stories. But they include in their computer class at the elementary level, they've retooled that to include coding, computer science, and different things. And then at the 7th and 8th grade level, they use Project Guts and Bootstrap to include it in their math and science courses. And the high school, they have the computer science 4-course sequence that students can take as a career and technology education pathway. So we do have one district that has embedded it throughout their pre-K to 12 school experience.
Great, and if we can just figure out how well it works, we'll be moving along.
Exactly, and I'll be sure to let you know when that happens, when they tell me.
Adriana, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. We can.
Oh, hi. This is Adriana Muscatelli, and I am the founder of Playwork Studio, which is a small startup here in Seattle, Washington. And we are developing a platform of robots called Robies, which is heavily influenced by the theory of constructionism and Seymour Papper's work that shows that children at 6 years old learn better through physical interaction with objects, which is why robotics has been so successful. And our work is funded by the NSF and the Department of Education. And so far, we have conducted 2 studies. One is a lab study in collaboration with the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences at the University of Washington. And our area of focus is to engage girls. And as you all pointed out, girls lose interest in STEM as early as 1st grade, which is why we're targeting 1st grade with our robots. And our first lab study showed a statistical significance between the girls who play with the robot games and the girls the girls who play with either a storytelling game or no game at all. And then we saw the same difference after we did a 3-week workshop with an elementary school. It's 90% free lunch. We're doing it in collaboration with a nonprofit organization here in Seattle called the Technology Access Foundation. And what we did is we worked with teachers and we allowed them to develop the curriculum. So our platform has some tiles, some puzzle pieces that children use to build a path for the robot. and it uses mobile phones, and you give commands to the robot, a forward, a turn, etc. And we have conditionals, and we have the concepts of loops, and of course the children have a lot of fun, and the most interesting thing has been for us to see the teachers becoming more comfortable with the technology. At first, the teachers are a little bit worried because this is at a prototype stage, of course, and just connecting the robot and making sure that everything works is a little bit scary for them, but it was very exciting to see the teachers becoming more comfortable and wanting to bring the robots more, and now we're going to be running the hour of code with them, and we plan on building curriculum. But what's cool about it is that the teachers are integrating the robots into a math lesson in a storytelling for reading and writing at first grade, and they have plans to teach geometry, etc. So that's pretty exciting.
That's really interesting, Adriana. It's getting the girls before they realize that they're not computer science to even, before they're lost, they're hooked. Very interesting.
Yes, and the data shows that we can make a difference, and that the question that we ask specifically is, are girls good with robots? Are girls good at programming? And we see a difference after a 20-minute exposure and a 3-week workshop. It's the same results.
Great. So your evaluation is starting to address what David was talking about, getting some real research, some real science behind what's working and how it should work. So very, very interesting. Thank you, Adriana.
Kathleen?
Yes.
This is Tom. Part of this question comes from, my just quick look at NSF and recognizing that they, at least their recent solicitations have been for exploring computer science and AP computer principles, which tend to be later grades. And so I'm very pleased to hear about this kind of work. And I wonder if the CS10K community has cataloged these really interesting, innovative, early learning, elementary, primary, middle school, in some kind of coherent way that we could go to the CS10K website and find these things.
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.
Tom? Hello?
I'm still here.
Oh, okay. The NSF is actually having, just really breaking into cataloging the CS10K, the two the products, the projects dealing with the two high school courses. But in the new solicitation, it's more of a K-12 perspective. And we've heard from Jan Cooney, who's extremely interested in the high school aspect of things, that she's also getting very interested in the K-12 aspect of it, or the K-8. Cataloging that as it proceeds, it would be a good idea. So let's see. So another question, and we've been talking a little bit about this. How can pre-K-8 teachers support students so they will be prepared to study computer science in high school and beyond high school?
Hi, this is Irene. When thinking about this question, I'm thinking of habits of mind, encouraging students to be creative in problem solving and to try different solutions to problems to gain them some persistence and perhaps resourcefulness. Those are all things that will help students as they go further in computer science.
Yeah, there's nothing like sticking to it until the bug gets solved.
Right. So it's not only, specific content or practices. It's habits that students can develop that'll be beneficial no matter what subject, but is really pronounced when you're learning about computer science.
And
I would certainly.
Cindy?
Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
No, I was going to agree with Irene, and what I was going to emphasize is the new college and career readiness standards in mathematics emphasize not just content, but there are also standards for mathematical practice. And the first one, for example, is understand problems and persevere in solving them. And so I think if mathematics teachers at a pre-K 8 level emphasize those standards for mathematical practice as students develop the content knowledge, they will be giving students those habits of mind as they've been called to be prepared to be successful in computer science courses in high school and beyond.
Cindy, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just add something a little different. Just also to expose them to different areas of computer science so that they don't think it's just programming. I think would be really helpful to get them engaged in it beyond high school.
Yeah.
And this is Heather from Maryland. I work with Cindy, and one of the things that we also see is that the idea of having the positive role models, particularly with new teachers, being very comfortable with having the younger students experiment, like the example Cindy gave, and giving them the freedom to think and apply those practices and really use it as creative problem solving. In Next Gen's cross-cutting concepts do a great job of offering plenty of opportunities for that, and with infusing that pre-K and beyond, it really helps build that skill set.
Interesting. I think it's important that students, when things get hard, in girls in particular, I think, tend to think, well, it's because I'm not good enough or I'm not right for it, when it just takes persistence, and it's not necessarily easy for anybody, but that those habits of mind would be really
exactly,
valuable.
And that grit that's involved in, you've got all these different tools in your toolkit instead of just one. If one doesn't work, let's keep trying something that fits for you.
Yeah, yeah. Did anybody else want to add anything, anybody from the panel or the audience on this topic?
David, I think that the really critical thing is sort of on the persistence front is persistence on the part of teachers and, if you will, persistence on the part of the system. And by that I mean lots of exposure, lots of opportunity, lots of making it part of what we're doing. I think that familiarity helps. I think that the problem-solving skills you get, I know this word hasn't been mentioned yet today, games, solving games, working on games, game kinds of environment help build some of those skills. And so I think that bringing all of those kinds of things together in an ongoing way, so that this is not something new that just, when you pose the question, how can pre-K teachers support students, et cetera, it's as if we expect them in 8th grade to all of a sudden be confronted with something new that they should just dive into for what reason. So it's a matter of, I think, this is a set of tools and a way of thinking which is useful for all sorts of things that students are doing. In the same way that the technology, that might seem a little bit overwhelming in some ways, is useful for things that little kids do. My 6-year-old grandchildren chat with each other regularly. So taking advantage of the environment, or recognizing the environment that the kids live in, I think is as important as anything else, and making sure that it's okay and it's part of the way that we learn and understand things is a really important message to have that may have a somewhat mitigating effect on the sort of shock of 8th grade, and all of a sudden we don't like science and math. Science is something ways to do.
Sue from our chat window said logic games, bigger problems that need to be broken down into sub-problems. That's a big computational thinking sort of thing. Awareness of how CS impacts non-science areas. it's everywhere, as computer science is used every part of life nowadays. Those are important things. Julie Metzger agrees with David. And Cindy at chat said students are digital natives. Yeah. So yeah. And Sue says girls in particular seem to want to make a difference and need to see how CS can actually support that. Yeah, crisis informatics, positive psychology, social media, where CS is used for people things, not just engineering things.
Right. So relative to the digital native comment, we want to make sure that we don't civilize them, because we tend to do that with young children's curiosity, for example. We civilize it right out of them.
Right.
Yeah. That's the problem with the standards. Once things are standardized, then how can you be different? But without standards, then yeah, you're kind of traveling, always cutting the jungle. So, was there anything anybody else wanted to add to this question? Okay, let's see what else. So now talking about standards, how well is computer science covered in the next generation science standards, the Common Core State Standards for mathematics, and I forgot to add here the CSTA standards. Do we have ideas on this?
I'll jump in first and say in NGSS they're not covered explicitly. All those terms we talk about computational thinking and algorithmic thinking and so on are all in there. But if you actually look through NGSS and look for computer science, I don't think you find it at all.
That's funny. Just before this, I did exactly that and didn't see it, and I thought, whoa, that's not there. But then if you search on computational thinking, you get a lot of hits.
Exactly. So, if the question is tuned towards how well is computer science covered in the science standards, I would have to say only poorly. And on the other hand, the science standards do provide a really good opportunity for using the tools and practices of computer science to help learn science. So that goes back to Matt's point early in the conversation about the use of computer science to help help learn mathematics or help learn science, or for that matter, help learn art, but that the focus is really on the primary subject, and the computer science is in the present construct secondary.
So the story in math is very similar to what David outlined for science, but from my perspective, the critical point is that was not the intent of the developers of the Common Core State Standards for mathematics. They didn't have any intention of addressing computer science standards. They were focused on the mathematics that students need to learn in order to be college and career ready. But with that said, there's an awful lot, as I've mentioned before, in the standards for mathematical practice that develop thinking habits that certainly contribute to the goals of computer science.
So Irene, do you want, could you talk a little bit about the CSTA standards?
Sure. So computer science and computational thinking are embedded throughout the CSTA standards, as they should be. One point I want to make, when we talk about computational thinking, I define it as the human ability to formulate problems so that their solutions can be represented as computational steps or algorithms to be carried out by a computer. To be able to think computationally, you really need to understand something about the underlying machinery and mechanisms that you are going to use, so you can formulate your problems to be carried out by that machinery, right? So while Dave says yes, computer science isn't there explicitly, which is totally true, by bringing computational thinking into the NGSS, it opens the door for at least realizing there's a need for computer science in support of the computational thinking. Dave, do you agree?
I do.
I think this is a great way to I'm sorry this has to wrap up soon, but it seems right that the science standards, the math standards focus on science and math, and CSTA standards focus on the computational aspects of things that Irene mentioned. I have to very quickly say thank you all so much. It was just it's exciting to listen to you all and the audience discuss these important topics. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. Please remember to, we had questions, join us on the CS10K community and follow us on Twitter at CS10K. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, audience.